What's that? What is it? What is it? Huh? Oh, it's your radio. Let's see. Oh. It's a light.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hmm. Come here. Come here. X, come here. Don't be so shy all of a sudden. What's that? Yeah, that happened today. What's up, sweetheart? Sweet boy. Sweet boy. I love you.
Explain where you are and a little bit.
Is this called the State Cemetery or the Capitol?
This is called the State Cemetery.
Okay. We ready?
Yeah, hold on one second. Go ahead.
Just a few blocks from the capital of Texas is the State Cemetery of the Lone Star State. As we can see by looking, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of gravestones that mark the passing of heroes over the many years for the state of Texas. Where I'm standing now mark the graves of soldiers from the Confederate States of America. Texas actually had soldiers that fought for both the North and the South. There are dignitaries buried here, dignitaries for the state, even dignitaries for the Republic. Everywhere you look is a war memorial, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the more current conflicts. As you look at the individual graves, you know that everyone has a story. J. Outman, 1842 to 1929, he served in Johnson's army. Did he have a wife? Did he have children? What are they doing today? Or maybe J.M. Sledge. He was in the Army of Northern Virginia, died in 1929. And the names and the tombstones go on, telling their stories of heroes. Heroes of yesterday, heroes of today, men and women who gave their life in some form or fashion in the service of the state of Texas. Okay?
I want you to. Yeah, come on all the way up here. I want to hear you talk just a little bit about the way that a cemetery evolves in a person's. Yes.
What to do with the remains of the dead has been a question that is as old as the earth itself. Back in the days of emperors and kings, mummification of a body, putting it into a tomb, was quite common. In the days of the Indians, to get as close to the sky as possible, many times the Indians were put upon boards or blankets that were extended on 4 poles above the earth.
I'm sorry.
That's right. Need to grab him.
All right, that's much
There is a bug.
Okay.
We rolling?
Yes.
The disposition of what to do with a body is probably as old as the earth itself. We know from history that mummies were found from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, cast in gold, leaving us with the belief that there was something special that had to be done with a body before it was entombed. In the days of the Native American Indians, many times the bodies of the Indians were placed on a blanket and put on top of 4 poles to put the body as close to the heavens where the Great Spirit was as possible. And in modern day times, we have our cemeteries. Cemetery is a place of interment, burial, many words might be used. It's often referred to as a resting place. And I think that that word is used because not only is it a place where the body is finally laid to rest, but it's a place that throughout the months and years to come, family members can come and spend time with their loved ones. It's not unusual on holidays to find flowers, flags, poems, pictures, all types of memorabilia left by the tombstone. I know that many friends that I have frequently go to the cemetery to, as they say, visit a loved one and maybe have a chat. I have a close friend, another chaplain, whose wife passed away from a severe illness. And after about 10 years, he met a woman and was preparing to marry again. And he told me, he said, "Dave, I went out to the and I had a long talk with my wife and told her who I had met and what I was about to do." So cemeteries are a place of remembrance, a place where stories, a place where memories are left. One can only take a few minutes and walk through a cemetery, and by the mementos that they find by the tombstones can tell much about the life of the person. I remember not long after 9/11, when I was in New York, long before there were any graves for 9/11 victims, there were memorials that had been set up along the way near the hospital, near where the Twin Towers had been. Pictures, mementos, and notes to loved ones. There's something important about ritual. Some people say there's never closure and things never get back to normal. But maybe after a walk through the cemetery, paying our respects and seeing the mementos and the stories left behind, maybe a loved one can begin that new normal.
I'm Chaplain Larry Todd in Austin, Texas. Just for your background, so you can write your intro or whatever, there are many definitions of chaplaincy. The definition that we use is a person who assists and wants to help and is a person of all faiths. So that might give you a very brief interview.
What is your professional background and so forth?
Well, it's varied. I'm a retired state employee. I'm retired from the military. I have an insurance business. And I have several things that I'm doing right now. But chaplaincy takes precedence, and it should, as a person can. If a person is really a chaplain, then that should come first as best they can. Obviously, a chaplain has to make a living and has other responsibilities as a family or job, but chaplaincy is a priority. I like to specialize in being of assistance. Now we can go into the grief if you're...
Yes. You can tell.
Okay, I got you.
Got it?
I got it.
Don't move it, right?
All right, I got it right there.
Right there.
I got it.
I can tell when you're doing good,
I got
Dave,
it,
because
I
it's...
I got it.
It should bother him just a little bit. when
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right, it should just be a
Yeah.
little bit irritating.
Dave is irritating.
That
so-
would be me.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
When a person experiences grief, there are many resources and many people to help. The professional helper, meaning a chaplain or minister or a counselor, is always best because that person has the training to be able to listen. Sometimes a person in grief, as you are at this point, would turn to a neighbor or a friend or relative, and that's always good, but there's limitations. A professional counselor or a minister or a chaplain can be there to listen and to be helpful and understanding because that person is a professional and has dealt with grief before. We're here in the State Cemetery in Austin, Texas. Many, many people buried here, from governors to legislators to military heroes, Confederate heroes. There are many, many families that have been affected by the deaths and by those who are buried here in this cemetery. And yet, they grieve too, and even their relatives grieve. So we fully understand what processes that you're going through, the difficulties, and how hard it is for you to understand and accept death. Death is is very difficult for us to understand. We ask why. We pray, and sometimes we don't get the answers from our Creator. But it doesn't stop us from asking the questions. And that's a good thing. You should ask those questions. Death is the oldest mystery that we know. And yet death is so simple. For many people who are Christians, have lived a Christian life, they feel that the receiving of death is a blessing. There are others, even Christians too, that don't understand why their loved one passed away. There are many, many resources, and I would urge you to consider those resources. They're not only biblical resources and not only religious resources, but the public library and just thinking, resolving, but you have help. And it's not a time to despair when you have lost a loved one, because we're all facing death, and we're not able to conquer death. No matter the situation, we cannot conquer death. We all face it. The best thing that I could offer to you in your time of grief is to pray, listen. Many times those prayers are answered. Frequently it's later on and we don't see that answer. Also, don't be ashamed to seek help. Ask those professionals, such as a chaplain as myself, or a minister, to help you. Social workers, many, many people that can provide you some guidance, and they can listen and listen to your heart as it breaks, as it aches because of those deaths.
Very good. Very good. Excellent.
Keep moving the sun.
The sun keeps moving. So
Yeah, the sun is moving, and that.
I think that one thing I want to do is I do want to get a shot of the two of you walking together.
Okay.
I can pick up sound even as far away as the steps over there.
Oh, wow.
So
Is that kind of what you wanted, the flow of it?
Yeah,
Beautifully.
yeah, exactly.
One thing I want you to talk about
Okay.
is there is something about the sudden loss of
Oh, that's good. That's a good thing.
and
Come on in.
Howdy.
How are you?
All right, how y'all doing?
Good. I'm Larry Todd.
Larry Todd. I'm Jason Walker. I'm with this cemetery.
Good. What do you do, Jason?
Well, what are y'all?
We're here. We're all chaplains, and we're shooting a video for grief. Who's the guy that's executive
Larry
director?
Bradley?
Yeah.
Have you talked to him?
No. Tell him Larry Todd used to be in the comptroller's office down here filming,
Okay.
and tell him we're staying sober.
Okay, good deal. That's perfect. As long as y'all aren't using any images of the names, are y'all? Okay.
No.
And it's not for commercial purposes.
Promotion for
Okay.
people to get help if they have grief.
Perfect. Perfect. You guys
Yeah.
are perfect.
I didn't bother Harry because
That's okay.
I didn't know if he was sober,
That's all right.
and I didn't want to give him a cigar.
That's all right. I understand.
No, but tell Harry it's Larry Todd.
Okay.
Used to be in the comptroller's office. I know his rules. I just didn't bother him.
Okay, that's okay.
I'm glad you checked.
I just needed to come by and see.
All right, I'm glad that you did.
All right.
You guys be good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
man, he used to be a politician because you could.
There's another word called bullshit. Nah, they got low rules, but we don't screw with that. Anyway, the other thing you were the topic.
Let me just sit right.
You want me to put over the sun?
Right there. Yeah. If you could just hold it
I
right.
can be right there.
Okay. Yeah, just go ahead and shine in the eyes, Dave. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah. David, step back a little bit.
Okay. Right there. I got it.
Perfect.
All right.
You mentioned we're going to do another topic of.
Yes. The sudden loss of life and
Ah.
violently.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
different dynamic.
Okay. One of the most difficulties that you may be facing is why that sudden death? Why did it happen so unexpectedly? Rarely are any of us prepared for death. Even when an elderly person is at a hospice on the deathbed for several days, rarely are we truly prepared. Sometimes we find families that are, but you still would question, and you would ask, why? Why that sudden death? There are very few answers. There are biblical references to death. Professionals will try to help you and try to explain the death. Many of them are accidents, car wrecks, something of that nature. I firmly believe that those are caused by man, not caused by God. God doesn't do harm for us. They're caused by man. Man even causes some diseases, but it's still difficult to accept. And my counsel and my urging to you would be, get professional help. That is nothing to be ashamed of. Find a chaplain or a minister that can help you and do some listening and listening. It is tragic. The best thing is to grieve, let that grieving process happen. If you want to cry, cry. If you want to kick a can down the street, that's okay too. Get the grieving process and you'll never forget it. Grief will subside, but many of us find that grief never really comes to an end. We don't have the answers, but you're not alone. This has happened to many other people throughout the entire world.
Very good.
Hope that's not too long. Let's talk about grief.
Okay. You want us talking?
Whatever you say, just wave. Grief is really hard for all of us, but you know, mankind's oldest challenge has been to conquer death. And yet we don't conquer death, but it's hard to accept, isn't it, Dave?
It is. Larry, you do a lot of funerals. What are some of the things that you say at a funeral that offers help and hope in time of need to people?
Of course, every funeral is different, as is every personality. But I try to let people know that we all face death. I try to encourage those in the audience and the survivors to be prepared and to know that someday we'll all meet again. Those in the hereafter and believe in our Creator, we're going to meet again. I don't know the form. I don't know how we will all look after we pass away in the spirit, but I let them know that there's hope. And I think hope is the key word to those survivors. And it matters not what religion they are or whether they believe, where they go to church. It's to let them know there is hope, there is a life in the hereafter. We have the promised gift of a life in the hereafter. I also encourage those survivors to live every day, live every minute, because life is short. Life is so short that it's unbelievable, and it passes so quickly. So I would encourage those to live their lives, live fully, take care of each other, have some fun, but believe that there is a promised life in the hereafter.
You know, we're standing in a state cemetery, a beautiful place. People refer to it as a place of burial, a place of interment, a final resting place. What do you see? There's great power in ritual. And burial is usually the last part of an ongoing series of rituals.
Right.
What do you see? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of ritual, Larry?
Well, ritual is so important, and that's the reason we have funerals. And the bottom line, to condense it, it is our opportunity to say goodbye to the deceased. And we do so with dignity, and with respect, and with love. And we do say goodbye, but we are saying goodbye to a body. We know that the spirit has departed that body, but it gives us a chance to reflect, and a chance to pray, a chance to communicate with our Maker, and to know that that body, in many religions, many beliefs, will be resurrected someday. And again, it comes back to hope. That gives us, the survivors, hope for a life that should be fulfilled. And I believe in Jesus. I believe that Jesus came to this earth so we could have life and enjoy it.
think, again, being in a cemetery, what do you think the importance of a cemetery is? It seems like that almost people go through stages when it comes to a cemetery, that maybe we're in a cemetery, of course, the time of interment, right after the funeral, but then the days and the weeks and the months and even the years that follow.
Well, the first phase at the cemetery is extreme grief and the feelings of loss, of sorrow, and that's understandable, and that lingers at different lengths of time for different people. And then as that person comes back, maybe a year or 2 years or whatever, to visit, they reflect and they think back about the times that they experienced with their loved one who's now deceased and buried in that cemetery. And then even maybe years later, they come back with great joy and remember the good times as they visit that grave. And I would encourage those that are having grief, have lost a loved one, to visit that cemetery often. The spirit is gone, but the body remains. And sometimes we can overcome a lot of that grief by just visiting the cemetery, especially such a beautiful and pleasant, restful place.
I've heard stories of people that will write poems, write letters to their loved ones, will leave memorabilia. Do you find that can be healing to people to write a letter, say, to a loved one and leave it?
By all means. And people come to the graveside of their loved one. They may offer prayer. They may just sit down and talk to that loved one, or they'll write a letter, a poem, or leave a memento. A good example of that is the Vietnam Veterans Wall, where people leave mementos, and that's good. That's a good healing process for those who are still in the grief phase of that loss. So absolutely, those are great things.
We're coming up on the holiday season, and I call it the firsts. When there's been a recent death, the first anniversary, the first birthday, the first talk a little bit about recent deaths, and when you come on those first things, like maybe coming up on the first holidays since the death. That's got to be hard.
It's got to be hard. It's got to be difficult after someone passes and to face those holidays, or the birthday of the deceased, or maybe the anniversary of the marriage. Those are always difficult. But I found that the first times they experience those dates are the most difficult. And then they become a little bit easier. And then we relax a bit more and start to remember the good times. But the grieving process is there. And Dave, it's always good to go ahead and grieve and to let it out. You know, we as men, we've been taught never to cry, never to show emotion. And ladies sometimes feel the same. We should cry, let it out, grieve, talk it out. There are many, many processes in grieving. And a professional counselor or a chaplain or a minister would help a person do that, or a doctor. But grieving is always good to get it out, accept the good times, and then remember hope.
In talking about grief, I'm not a big believer in steps of grief. I know that Joel Stein and Kubler-Ross and some others talk about the stages of grief, and maybe to some degree they have some validity. But just talk to me a little bit about grief in general, how maybe even you personally, or how you've seen someone walk through the grief process, Larry.
We as chaplains are taught the various levels of grief and the steps of grief, and that's just so that we can understand it. And if we're working with someone who's in the grief process, that we'll know where they are and how they stand. I think every person's different. People grieve in a different way. Then we come in the self-destruct or the suicide mode, and that's what's most difficult for some people, because they do think about that. They know that they've lost their loved one, and it's more than they can bear. Those are the people that we've got to help the most, and there's probably someone viewing this that may have thought of that. Get help, because you still have a life to live. And while life isn't fair, it's a pretty good life. Finish out the life and work with your loved ones, pray and remember hope. And the phases of grief will change. Grieving will become somewhat easier. It's never over. It's never easy to accept, but it will lessen, and you will enjoy life more as you progress.
I've heard this phrase, and I believe that there is something to it. I've had people ask me and say, well, Chaplain, when will things get back to normal? And Larry, I'll tell them, I'll say, you know, my friend, things will never get back to normal, but there'll be a new normal for you.
Death is such a big change and a shock, but it does change our lives. And this is the way it's been laid out for us from our Creator, and we have to accept it and understand it. If we don't understand, we still accept it, but we have to study it, and you know, we've studied death for years and years and years, and we still don't have all the answers. So the best thing that we can do is grieve, accept it, share with others, and then we move on. I had a couple not long ago. They'd been married 60 years, and one passed away, and the other one was just as happy. Said, well, this is just a temporary departure, and we'll be back together someday. What a beautiful attitude.
That good?
Well, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, go ahead. One of the things I want to have you touch upon, right around, standing right around there.
Yes, sir.
Is I guess the time when you knew that you had done something as a chaplain that was just pure chaplaincy, where you said, "Wow, what I just did was that was what a chaplain does. I feel like a chaplain."
Oh, several. Yep. Some of them are kind of goofy.
I'm gonna let you tell those, because he's heard mine.
Okay.
When you've done some things that were just kind of maybe not right out of the textbook, but where you knew if you did something a little bit quirky that was going to help this in this particular situation. I'm just gonna. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just tell us.
Well, Dave, you know, you've been working as a police and fire chaplain for most of your life, really. You've seen a lot of things, and to me, I'm still fascinated when I see those things. I'm a chaplain for some fire departments, and I love to ride with those guys and watch them. I'm the chaplain for the first responders, not necessarily the victims, because they're generally paid chaplains.
Right.
The people do the victims. First responders are the ones that need the chaplain the most, and they're great people to work with. Been some great experiences. One was an elderly lady, and I happened to have on a clergy collar that day, and she thought I was of a particular faith that is associated with that collar, and she expressed displeasure at that particular faith. And when I told her that collar comes off, I just reached up and pulled it off. We had a long conversation, and it helped her in the grieving process because she had just lost a loved one, and I think she was using grief or anger to help cover up some of that grief. But I think we relaxed and had a good time. Maybe shouldn't tell this, but she asked me to go to the convenience store and get her a cold one. Well, I don't know how God feels about that, but I did exactly what that lady wanted to do. It put her at ease, and that was the grieving process. A chaplain is supposed to be a ministry of presence, not talk as much, Dave, so you'll have to help me out on that. One of the things I did quite by accident, a couple of preachers here in Central Texas, and they had big churches, and they were at odds with each other. And accidentally, I stumbled into meeting them both at a luncheon and brought them together, and they sat down, they talked for hours, and they buried the hatchet, so to speak. That was an interesting time as a chaplain. A chaplain can have a lot of flexibility and can provide a ministry of presence. And I've been so blessed to just even be on the peripheral of this great thing that we call chaplaincy. And that's one of the things I admire about you. You've been around this for so long. I've learned from you. And A lot of times I take those courses from Chaplain Fellowship Ministry to learn and to be a chaplain. And I would encourage others to consider chaplaincy, whether or not they're standing in the pulpit speaking to thousands of people or working one-to-one. I think that God has a plan for us.
I agree, and I've heard this little saying that a pastor does not necessarily a good chaplain make.
Mm-hmm.
And let me explain what I mean by that.
Please.
Sometimes it is difficult for a pulpit minister to take that preacher's hat off
Mm-hmm.
and to not preach the party line and to put on his chaplaincy hat, and always remember that chaplaincy is about them.
Yes.
It's not about us.
Mm-hmm.
And you were telling the story about the lady that asked you to go to the convenience store and get a cold one. I had a very unique situation that happened. I was asked to do a funeral for a man that I didn't know, but I knew one of the family members. And this was not a church-going family. And I always go over and meet the family to try to find some anecdotal stories, about the family member. And